Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar this morning. On behalf of Guyana Trans United, I would like to welcome you. Thank you we just had a few minutes glitch, and one of our colleagues, Annie, who is in Kuruvita in Region 6, Annie just has to shift location, and so she will be joining us in a minute. In 2018, Candacy, Gulliver, McEwan, Pheches Joseph Fraser, Angel Seon Clarke, and Isabella Seyon Persaud succeeded at the Caribbean Court of Justice in their case to show that the cross-dressing laws discriminated against them. This is the first time in the history of independent Guyana that any citizen had challenged any law and to get the law deemed unconstitutional. The discrimination faced by transgender persons and other LGBTIQ plus persons in Guyana has faced many forms. Today, we will reflect on the impact these laws have had on transgender persons by listening to some of the experiences. And we will also be reflecting on the data collected by Guyana Trans United in the Shared Incident Database. The Shared Incident Database is a project of the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, CVC. So in our agenda today, how we've organized the session is in panel 1, we'll have first panel looking at changing the laws. Then we'll have a brief question and answer session. Then in panel 2, we'll have the presentation of the data from the SIDS database. Then we will have the plenary discussion and the vote of thanks. And we're aiming to finish by 12 noon Guyana time. In some general housekeeping, for those of you who are new to PANCAP's GoToWebinar platform, mics are muted and are left muted. Please click the raised hand icon during the Q&A and discussion, and you can find that on your control panel. And of course, you can type your questions and comments in the chat at all times. And what will happen is that we will deal with those questions as they come up either during the session, or if people have responses, they can put that. We've also committed to any questions that we can't answer during the session, we will collect them and collect answers and email them after the session. Our colleague, Timothy Austin from PANCAP, is helping to manage the technical aspects of the webinar. So thank you very much in advance, Timothy. So as we move to the first panel and we get started, on this first panel, we have first of all Candacy Gulliver McEwan, who is a founder and executive director of Guyana Trans United. Candacy has been visible during the whole court proceedings since they started, and has inspired me and other persons with her hopeful spirit and sense of general optimism, especially against those who want to discriminate. Annie Megnauth is an LGBTIQ plus activist and works as a prevention officer at Family Awareness Consciousness Together, otherwise known as FACT NGO. Annie contributes to FACT's important work in Berbice, or Region 6, as we call it. And what I've done is there is a map there I've put on for those of you who are not from Guyana, so that you can see where Georgetown is located and understand that on our panel, we have people from outside of Georgetown. So Region 6 is close to our border with Suriname. And FACT bridge gaps in HIV service delivery and provides family support services in Region 6. Our third panelist is Kenny Harrinarine. Kenny is an LGBTIQ plus activist who has worked on reporting incidents of human rights violations in the SID database. Kenny is based in Region 3, which is sort of over the river from Georgetown, over the Demerara River. Kenny is a mechanic and is an accomplished photographer whose work was in the Visions 2018 exhibition. So now, in moving over to the panel, Candacy will first respond to the question, how were the cross-dressing laws removed from Guyana's law books? What was that process like? Over to you, Candacy.
Good morning to my fellow panel. I want to begin to say I always would like to reflect on the particular incident night that we was being picked up as a magical moment in terms of the long years to getting where we is today. Many trans person would have been suffered, harassed, locked up, and been imprisonment at time, force you to actually suppress your identity. That is one, as a trans person. Many times you would have been going out on the road, and it's because of who you is in access in public spaces. You was being charged and being in prison. I think I refer to that particular night as the magical night, in meaning it was 7 trans persons was being picked up, and we realized that in numbers we could have been. And what we didn't resist the lockup. We went into the lockup. We spent, some of us was being locked up over 72 hours. We was placed before the magistrate court, which was our first court. We were told by the magistrate at a particular time that being a male dressed in female attire, it's abomination and we need God. We then felt further discriminated because we felt if we remained with the judgment at the magistrate at a particular time, it gives the power the police officer who was then the prosecutors in those matters to further criminalize and lock up and come after us more often than they were continued to do. So we then placed being before the court, we were asked to pay fine, which we did pay, and we went on bail also because we were charged with 2 particular matters. One, we were charged a lightering, and one, we were charged a male dressed in female attire. We paid, each one of us paid, I think, about 17,500 at the particular time for both of the offense. One, then we came out, we were looking for a human rights organization to actually document our violation because we realized that it should be a turning point because it was our number at the particular time was the first time transferred would have been locked up. And we formed body support whilst we were in the lockup over 72 hours. We came out and then we reached with SASOD at the time was the only LGBT organization at the time that we knew about was documented LGBT violation. It took us actually a year to get in 2010, it was in 2009, in 2010 that we were able to go before the Court of Appeal, and we went through from 2010 to 13, where at the Chief Justice at the particular time said, oh, expressing your gender identity, then it's not a criminal offense, but for improper purpose. And then we realized that the word improper purpose was this, and we couldn't wrap our head around it to know what it would have been the improper purpose. We assume in our mind that even though sex work is not a criminal offense, but the things around sex work in terms of solicitation and such is a criminal offense, then we were wanted to be clear in the judgment at the Chief Justice. What is the improper purpose? So we went all the way to the appeal court. Mind you, it's not easy as a citizen in any country to bring a litigation against the government. So there's one that supporters at the time Europe who would come in our vote of thanks way down in order to support us in this particular journey. We went to the Court of Appeal, and basically the Court of Appeal actually uphold this exact thing that the other court would have said, but with a bit definition to say, okay, then it's when you go before the magistrate, then the magistrate will decide what would be the improper purpose. We realized that we could not do it because even though from 2009, when we've been before the first court to the second court, person were still being picked up and harassed for gender expression. And even being in before the magistrate court, they were magistrate who would have been locking trans persons just dressed in female attire to go before the court. So we realized if we leave it to the magistrate to decide, it become more problematic because we live in a society knowing that religious play a part. and people hold on to their moral value in front of human rights. So we realized at the particular time we could not have gone before the court and allow a magistrate to decide what is the improper purpose. So we went on all the way to the CCJ, and that in 2018 we get a favorable judgment, which I'm referred to as the magical nights, but it was a long halt, and it's knowing for all those years to actually bring in a matter of such a nature before the court, you have to prepare physically and mentally, and you literally has to know what is your goal that you want to achieve. So those were some of the things that you need to do, because many times you wanted to quit, but once you understand what is it that you want to bring about, a particular change is about, then you would press on.
Thanks, Candacy. Finish here?
Yes, Vidya, I think we left the
Okay, so
rest.
you're finished for now, right? Okay, thank you very much for that. And as always, just to reflect again, welcome to all of those who've just joined us. And to reflect again, Candace, that in the lead, that all the trans community, that during this time, it was a long haul, but always in the media, it was always with a very much sense of hope and optimism in a country which sometimes had a lot of divisions, and that and this was something that we learned during this time. Um, our second panelist, and I'm glad, so Annie is on. Our second panelist, Annie, who's, remember you said is from Region 6, which we call Berbice, roughly in Guyana. Annie will reflect during this time of the course, what was life like for trans persons and other LGBTIQ plus persons in Region 6 during this time. So over to you, Annie.
Good morning to my other colleagues on the panel, and to our host, good morning, and for all those who are joining us in this most auspicious moment when we can celebrate, even though I said more could have been done, but we are thankful for baby steps. We know that we are going places. So I say I'm very happy to be part of this panel and part of this discussion. So going back to the topic, we in Region 6, let me start by saying a lot of times we in the Berbice region of Region 6 are always being left out of things. We always been seen as the stepchildren of Guyana. All the focus normally or mainly happen in Region 4. But when it comes to the LGBT population, we are in the spotlight, just like Region 4, because of police brutality. We always in the entanglement with the police force. So during all these things that were going on, because of the low literacy that's affect a lot of persons from the LGBT community, and when I say low literacy, persons had to drop out of school because of no acceptance between the family, because of bullying, because of so many things. So that's one of the high reason why they're out of school and seek employment, whether as a domestic, whether it is in the estate, whether in farming. But then they also has their own personal life. So when they would go to bars and dressed up in their little nice flamboyant tops and shoes and bags and hairdo and all these things, there is where you and the police come into contact. And there were so many incidents and so many issues between the LGBT population and the police. And a lot of times we end up in the station. I personally were part of a rounds up when they did rounds up, and we were all in our female attire. But like my colleague Gulliver, they were charged and placed before the court. Like in our situation, we were not charged, but we had to do community work in the station compound. And it's all happened on a Saturday night. So imagine on the Sunday morning, my church that I worship is right next door to the police station. And so you had to be doing community work in the station, dressed in your female attire. So these are things that I highlight to let you, a person who are tuning in, to know that we too suffered fate similar to the other region, and many times it's not being highlighted. Um, During the course of the action, when Gulliver and the other colleagues would have been able to take in this matter further, whether it be the magistrate court, whether it be the CCJ, there are a few of us who would have already been linked to NGO like myself. And so because of linkage to NGO, we were able to be part of discussion, be part of receiving information. And because of us receiving information, we were able to disseminate those information in support groups, in, like we said, peer support groups, in prevention, when we go to do the prevention messages, we were able to share these information to let our colleagues know that, we have people in Region 4 who is paving the way, who is working for us, who is fighting for us, if I want to use a better word, a stronger word, who is fighting for us. So let's be strong, let's hold on, let's continue to be in this together. And so these were things that were discussed. And yes, police harassment was very, very clear as crystal in Region 6, especially in Corriverton area, Tayin area, Tayin, Wimrose, all the areas where you have the LGBT community is more visible. Um, Going down to Kanji side, going down to New Amsterdam side. These are particular areas that you can find the LGBT population, and also you can relate to the harassment and stuff. And not only with the police, it happened to also. It also happened in the health sector and in other places. And so we were being harassed, we were being discriminated in all form with the police. But as I said again, we're happy that we can come this far as a community, not as a single person, but as a community. It went so far in Corriverton that we have lost a member of our of the community. She was murdered. She was born to death in July, the 21st of July, 2013. And up to now, justice has not been served because of discrimination. The police were not on our side, I must say. The police were not in favor of our community. So all these things happen right in Region 6. And a lot of times they are not being highlighted. They're not being highlighted. So as I mentioned, having this core group, having this support group, having this peer support group, having this prevention interaction, these were the platform that I, as an LGBT activist, would have used to inform my peers, to inform my LGBT community of the work that is being done in Georgetown and the way forward for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie, and honoring all of those who have died as a result of this, who were killed and whose killers were never found, and we invoke them in this gathering, or those who might have attempted suicide or killed themselves, we invoke them in this space because we must always remember them, because that is what the cost of this discrimination has been over the time. And so the third panelist now, Kenny. Kenny's going to talk to us about what was like for trans persons and other LGBTIQ plus persons in Region 3 now during this time. Kenny, over to you.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah,
Good
we're hearing
morning,
you,
Kenny.
Kenny. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Kenny.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity for speaking on behalf of my peers and LGBT members from Region 3. It is a great privilege to come to you this morning and to share what has been happening not only now, but generations gone in Region 3. Is there any way I could share my screen? I have slides.
um, there is an icon. Kenny, you have slides with you. Okay, sure. Timothy,
Yeah, I see it come up
I made him present a video. He can go ahead and share
now.
right.
his screen.
Okay, if you look at Kenny on your panel, you will see underneath there is a share screen icon. There's something like a share screen icon that you can click on to share the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, lovely. We're seeing it now, Kenny. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kenny. Yeah, we're seeing it. You're on the second slide
I think
there.
it's on now. Are you
Yes,
seeing
we're seeing your
my
second
screen?
slide. We're seeing
Okay.
this. Right.
Okay, just a minute. I gotta get the control out of the way.
Right. There we go. Yes.
Okay, I'm ready. Are you hearing me clear?
Yes. Go ahead,
Okay.
Kenny.
Life for trans person and LGBT plus person in Region 3 has always been challenging. We face a high rate of unemployment, homelessness, and HIV. Okay, are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you, Kenny.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yes, we're hearing you, Kenny. Go ahead.
Hello?
We're hearing you, Kenny. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, you could see the screen as well?
We're seeing the screen. Go ahead, Kenny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Life for trans person and LGBT person Life for trans person and LGBT person in Region 3 has always been challenging. We face a high rate of unemployment, homelessness, and HIV. Living away from the capital or city, there is less opportunities and less freedom for LGBT people. We experience discrimination, harassment, and physical violence on a daily basis and in every setting imaginable. This is more so for persons who identify as transgender. I am going to share a few cases of such discrimination met out against us in public transportation, at the community level, workplace, police station, hospital, and elsewhere. My first case is from a trans woman who we will refer to as GH. GH and four other trans women went to a wedding in a village on the west coast. They then went out on the public road, dressed in woman clothing to catch transportation. GH and her friends were approached by a van with policemen who offered to give them a drop closer to their destination. The police tricked them and took them to the Lenore police station instead. There they were locked up for 4 days. During this time, the police would take two of the younger trans women into separate rooms and demanded sexual favors from them. The five trans women were placed before the court, where they were charged for loitering, and was told by the magistrate to pay the fine and get out of his face. My second case is from someone who identifies as gay. We will refer to that person as NS. NS is a young person that used to attend a Christian church in his community. One Sunday, the pastor preached a message condemning gays and homosexuality. NS felt offended by the pastor's sermon and stood up in front of all of the church members and told the pastor how he felt about his preaching. NS left the church and never went back. Other cases of discrimination and LGBT rights violation experienced in Region 3 include persons being put out of public transportation by drivers and conductors, police refusing to report from police refusing to take report from persons looking gay or cross-dressing, persons being refused examination from doctors after being assaulted, denied entry into the magistrate court because of one's gender expression, persons being verbally harassed at the bus park, public events, marketplace, and many others. In closing, it would be unfair to portray Region 3 as being only homophobic. However, I must also point out that Region 3 has been a refuge to LGBT persons fleeing persecution and discrimination from other parts of Guyana that are more hostile towards gay persons, towards LGBT persons. Thank you very much. I now hand you over back to Vidya.
Thank you very much, Kenny. You can stop sharing your screen now. There's a button to stop sharing your screen when you're ready. Good. I think it right. Just click the button. Good. So welcome again to all of the persons who, no, we're still seeing it. There's a stop sharing. You see the sharing in the control panel? There we go, right, yeah. The sharing is stopped. So welcome again to everyone who has joined us since. Just as a reminder for our agenda, what we're doing now, we're at the stage where after this first opening panel, which reflected on the experience of transgender and other LGBTIQ plus persons during their court case, we're now open to have a couple of questions specifically to the panel on this at this time. And you can and then we will move on to the second panel with Alessandra presenting the data. So just, you can use, there are two options for those of you, there's a questions you can put in the chat, or there is also another place to put questions on your panel. Or you can also raise your hands and if you have any questions. Right, okay, so I think I see, right. So I see some hands raised. Okay, so Nicholas, you can take your question.
Hi, hello. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much again for your presentations, Annie, Kenny, and Ms. Candacy. And thank you so much again for the work you've done in terms of advancing LGBTQI rights awareness in Guyana and the Caribbean. I just have a question in terms of the charges related to both of the charges with Annie. No, was it Annie? I think it was actually everyone that mentioned that they would be harassed by police. That's one thing. Is there any way that we could put charges against police for, like, in terms of harassment? And the second question is, I noticed, or maybe it's a comment, but I noticed they would tend to charge persons who, like, persons who are trans. They would usually charge them with loitering. Has there been any push anywhere in terms of addressing this question of loitering and its relation to particularly how it affects trans and sex workers in Guyana? Because I noticed that it's in the same area that the cross-dressing law was in, so it shows this clear like connection between the two types of issues, and it's rooted in a lot of colonial stuff. But I'm just wondering if there had been any action, not necessarily to remove it because I haven't seen anything about it, but any thought or consideration to that end.
Sorry. Thanks, Nicholas. Candacy, you want to answer? There's two questions there about like when the police harass, have there been any actions to take to complain against the police or when they harass trans persons? And the second question is about the loitering of charges.
So the question, the first one, we live in a country that litigation is very tough. And to make report against police, and you go through the whole triage in terms of reporting human rights violation, you need a really strong person to take those matters forward. In terms, especially if you're trans and engaged in sex work, and if you're gonna file a report against a particular police officer, then you need to not go back onto the street for a period of time, because what might happen, you might not be harassed by a particular police officer, but you might have several police might come after. So make a report against police, you have to be cautious how you go about doing it, especially for trans persons who don't have a fixed income to go out and do this. You then rely on person to take your matter in terms of litigation for free. It would be pro bono. And certain things you're not able to go after because of your economic situation, especially for the first part. I don't know if there's been time that we were reported because there's a period of time, especially when we were locked up, there's a period that the police could have hold you for 72 hours. And some of us was of hold beyond 72 hours. So when we talk about the cross-dressing case, all that being a part of the case in terms of police holding you beyond the 72 hours. And that was being addressed.
Right. And in terms, I just wondered, Annie or Kenny, y'all had any experience with trying to report police or bring charges against police?
So I will go.
Yes, I must say.
Annie. Okay, Annie,
Right.
Annie.
So I
Okay.
will go here, not to bring charge against the police, but as Gulliver would have rightly said, you're not. We have never been charged for cross-dressing, but we were picked up because of loitering. Even though we had on female attire. Um, what happened is most of the time when they come and they pick you up, they seize opportunity. So it's either you just left the bar and you're outside side of the bar, side of the street corner, trying to negotiate something, some business, something, and a few of you there because we always walk within a pair, right? Somebody gotta watch somebody back, and this is reality, right? I have been there and done that, so I know about being on the road. And so while you're there, that is where they will use the opportunity now to come and say, well, you're loitering, right? I was part of that. They hold me on that ground, place me into the lockup for the Saturday night, which was like after 12. And then the Sunday morning, they lose us and said they wouldn't charge us and put us before the court. But we got to do the community work, cleaning the police compound, right? And for me, that was portraying me in front of my community, embarrassing me in front of my community and my family, and most so to me, but the place that I worship is just next door. It's just one fence divide. So everybody from in the building could have seen me there in my female attire. I have overcome those days, and I'm stronger now. I don't care. But coming back to the police, you can become a victim. You can become a target, as Gulliver rightly said. That police officer might not come to you the next time, but because of what would have happened, because of how would have reacted to him, because of what the next step that you would have taken, they all talk about it. And once you're there, you can be in a dangerous position. I can tell you with experience. It's either you get a sound beating from them, and they could always say, well, oh, you were trying to rob somebody, and all kind of thing. So it's kind of ticklish. I hope I've made it clear so that Nicholas and others can really understand.
Yeah. Thanks, Annie. Kenny, yes, on the issue of the police complaint against the police.
Yeah, I must share. Myself and colleague were involved in an incident a few years ago whereby some of them was physically assaulted by a former member of the Guyana Police Force, who is also a member of the LGBT person of the LGBT community. We went to the station, we made the relevant reports. We weren't getting anywhere with the story, with the case, because the police was all in the favor of this former police. I ended up going to the police complaint in Georgetown, and it is only then that I got some relief from the matter because the person used to see me everywhere and cuss me out on the road and so because of the incident. So it is only when until I went to the police complaint in Georgetown they call the head office, the head division here in Region 3, and they give that individual a strong warning, and it was only then that I got some peace of mind.
Okay, thank you, Kenny.
Back to you, Vicky.
Right, Kenny, one quick question. I'm just bringing in, as you're on the panel on the floor, there was just a question from Robert, who wanted to know if discrimination is still happening towards LGBT in region in the health services area specifically. How are things now in the health sector?
Okay, we recently had a session with persons from the Region 3 hospital, the medical staff there, the doctors there, and we had a very good reception. And they were very open-minded, and they came across very, very positive towards gay people. And I'm sure that's the same attitude that they would give to the patients, LGBT patients. We did have incidents whereby persons were refused examination by doctors because they were cross-dressing. But however, I hope that all of that has changed now, and
Right.
it's a better attitude when you go to the healthcare facility.
Okay, good. Right. And so Gulliver, did you sorry, Candacy, did you address the lightering story? I mean, is lightering what's happening with the lightering charges? Are people still being charged for lightering?
Yeah, they are there now that the cross-dressing is not there. So the police, if they were found on you, they would likely to find something. So they would normally would say littering. But one of the thing is that for the years after the cross-dressing case has been engaging in the court, I'm grateful to the fact that many trans persons now become vocal. We have organizations that represent trans persons. And many times we go before the police when our colleagues is calling us. Like over the weekend, a few of our colleagues called me and said, okay, the police just picked them up and locked them up. And they were on the phone with me while they were talking to the police at the set time. So many times the fact that the work that trans person is getting visible and able to recognize the human rights and understanding human rights violation and such forth and able to speak out. So it's very likely that they don't end up before the court. And there's more likely that we have persons, especially in all the regions, that look out as the older folks of Kenny, and you have Milton in Region 3, you have Royston in Berbice, we have Pat and such forth. So there is a community persons always in this region that always look out for these young trans or LGBT person, and that is used as a way in order to navigate some of these things enabled before it even meet before the court.
Okay, thanks. So Alicia has posed a question, but Alicia, I'll just leave that question. I think that's for the what next stage. So Alicia, we'll just park your question there for the second discussion. Millie, you have your hand up. Millie, you have your hand up.
Millie, you just need to unmute your mic. Just click the orange icon with the microphone to unmute your microphone. Video, I think she's having issues finding the unmute button. So probably we can come back to her.
All right, Millie, we'll come back. Please leave your hand up and we'll come back to you in the second one. Okay. Gulliver, in the a quick answer to Ralston, who's asked if the law has been taken completely out of the books. Yes, Ralston, there's been, and we can discuss that a little bit more in the second session. The Parliament voted recently to remove the law, following the CCJ judgment, to remove the law from the books, and that was done a couple of weeks ago. And we will just come back to that process later. Gulliver, Martin from Suriname, what did the article explicitly say? Can you remember what the article explicitly said within the law? The summary law.
So I don't know which, because we had several rulings, so I don't know which specific ruling
So,
I'm talking about. But I know for a fact when we went to the first court, not the magistrate court, we were told by then the acting chief justice at the particular time that once you're expressing the identity, then you as a trans woman were able to do that. So that was the first ruling, but because of the word saying for a proper purpose, then we could not have allowed it. So we went on to the second court, which was the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal basically uphold what the first court would have said, but with a bit definition. And then we went all the way to the CCJ. And when we went to the CCJ said this article, because the cross-dressing law, it was not applicable directly to trans. It's only laws that criminalize any male or female dressed in a particular way. But what we found that it's only trans person would have been suffered because of this bad law. And the CCJ rule entirely said this is a violation that violates only one group of persons, and this minority group of persons. So the CCJ went through all the laws at a particular time that affect trans person and see that the different companies, when they decide to rule on the particular law.
right. Thanks. Okay, so we'll what we can do now. So there are a couple of questions which we just park for the next just for the second plenary. So what we'll do now is move on to the presentation of the analysis of data from the shared incident database collected by Guyana Trans United. And the presenter is Alessandra Hereman. Alessandra is a trans woman, feminist, and social justice activist. She's presently the project coordinator of a USAID project at the Guyana Trans United. Alessandra conducted the analysis on the data from Guyana Trans United in the shared incident database as a consultant with the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition. So over to you, Alessandra.
Thank you, Vidya, and good day, everyone. Can you confirm if you're seeing my screen?
Yes, we're seeing your screen, Ali.
Great. So in this presentation, what I'll do is briefly describe what the shared incident database is. I would also go through the method of data analysis that was done, as well as limitations of the findings that are presented here today. I would also present some of the key findings that came out of this analysis and conclude with some recommendations that came out of this analysis.
Alexandra,
So
you can make the screen full screen for us. You can just put it in slideshow mode, please, so we can see it full screen.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. Thanks.
I just need to minimize this. I'm just trying to minimize the video because it's blocking my slide.
Just click the orange arrow at the top and that will minimize it.
Okay. Great. So briefly, SID stands for Shared Incident Database, and it's an online database that was created and is managed by the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, or CVC, to document incidents of human rights violations. There are 4 key elements of the SID database. Firstly is the recognition that human rights violations happen. And in order to address human rights violation, there is a need for data which would inform step 3 of this process, which is advocacy. But in order to reach at the stage of advocacy, we have to document incidents of human rights violations, and this is where step 2 comes in. Effective documentation involves a do no harm approach, being confidential and ethical in documentation, as well as being objective. Effective documentation then informs the advocacy process to initiate change and address incidents of human rights violations within our society. And most importantly is redress. So we're not just going to document incidents of human rights violation, but we want redress for persons who were victims or survivors of incidents of human rights violation. So this is just a summative presentation of what the SID database is all about and the steps involved in documentation. So the method of analysis, what we did is we used Microsoft Excel to manipulate the data set. And the data set that we are using for this analysis include data that was gathered from 2017 through 2021. The qualitative findings for the analysis came primarily from interviews or reports done with the social worker at Guyana Trans United, as well as SID reporting officers. And that would be Kenny and Annie, who would have worked as SID reporting officers in the past. There are several limitations of the data that is being presented here today. Firstly, the data presented are secondary data, and variables of research importance were not readily available from the data set. For example, ethnicity and sexual orientation. Secondly, because confidentiality, there is no way of tracking multiple reporting of the same incident made by the same individual at a different organization. So for example, if someone came at Guyana Trans United to make a report and they felt re-victimized, they might left and go to SASOD to make the report. But there is no way of tracking that if the same individual reported it twice at the different organization. And finally, an incident of discrimination may fall under multiple categories. For example, a femme presenting gay man may experience physical violence, but that violence may also be gender-based violence in nature. And the person who is reporting or inputting this incident in the database might privilege reporting it as physical violence as opposed to physical violence and gender-based violence. So what happens is that when you're looking at the data, some categories of human rights violation may seem underreported, and we're going to look at this later on in the presentation, especially as it relates to incidents of gender-based violence. The first finding was number of cases. What we found is between January of 2017 and April of 2021, there were 271 reported cases in GTU's SID. Of the 271 cases, however, 7 persons reported human rights violations twice. Thus, we're working with 2 data sets here. The data set of 271 will be used for analysis involving forms of human rights violations and frequency, while the data set of 261 will be used for analysis involving variables such as gender, location, and age. And the reason why we remove the 7 persons is that we don't want to double count gender and age in the analysis. What this slide is showing is the number of cases reported per year. GTU started the operationalization of the SID database in 2017, and as you can see, there were 87 reported or documented cases in the database in the year 2017. In 2018, that number peaked and there were 96 reported cases in the database. However, you see a gradual decline in the number of cases that were documented in the database, with 2020 having the lowest number of documented cases at 15 cases per the entire year. However, as you can see from January 2021 as of April, there was an increase in the number of cases documented. There were several factors to explain this pattern that we are seeing here. Firstly is that in the year 2020, the Guyana Trans United lost major donor funding. And so the organization had issues with operating. We weren't fully open, SID officers weren't employed by the organization. Thus, this affected how we executed our work. Also, as you're aware, in 2020, we were hit with the global COVID-19 pandemic. And this also affected how implementation was done. And this could possibly account for the low number of documented cases in the year 2020. When we looked at gender, what we found is that the majority of persons who reported incidents of human rights violations were trans women.
Timothy, you're there?
Hi, Vidya. I think Alexandra is having issues with her internet. You may need to move on to the other item. There's some
Okay.
questions in the questions tab.
Alessandra, are you there? Alessandra's talking again. Ali, you want to turn off your video and just try? Let me just see if I can make contact.
Alexandra, you can go ahead. I think we're hearing you now.
Okay,
ahead,
I thought I was
Alexandra.
disconnected. I saw the pop-up say I was disconnected. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Right. So we only.
Ali, do you want to turn off your video? Do you want to try turning off your video?
Hello?
Hi, Ali. Do you want to try turning off the video and see if it will help?
Okay. 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 So there were several postulations why trans men reporting human rights violations were only 2%. And one of the postulations was because the trans-led organization, it is still perceived as a trans organization that caters for only the needs of trans women. And so trans men might feel that this organization does not address the needs of trans men or trans masculine community. And so there is a need for more advocacy and education and to broaden the scope of work that we do at the Guyana Trans United to be inclusive of gender diverse persons apart from trans women only. When we look at the age of reported cases, what we found is that persons range in age from 18 to 57 years with an average age of 29.5, standard deviation of 8.7. The majority of persons who are reporting incidents of human rights violation, almost 62% came from persons between the age of 20 to 29, so very young persons reporting incidents of human rights violations. Persons between the age of 30 to 34 accounted for 30% of all reported cases, while those aged 45 years and older made up only 6.8% of all reported cases. For geography and locality, and Annie is on the panel, and Annie can probably speak about the regional tendencies in Berbice and possible factors for why this is so. But what we found is that the significant number of documented cases came from East Berbice Quarantine region, accounted for 41.2% of all documented cases. The regions with the second highest number of documented cases were Demerara Mahaica, Region 4, followed by Essequibo Islands, West Demerara, Region 3, which collectively accounted for 54.9% of all documented cases. There were several postulations as to why we also saw this trend. One is that most of the resources to address LGBT issues are concentrated in Region 4, and so there are options. We have Guyana Trans United, we have SASOD, we have CAIBO, we have Equal Guyana. And so if persons experience human rights violations, we don't have one organization in Region 4, we have many organizations, and so there are options, and this may explain why Region 6 has the highest documented cases, because unlike Region 4, there are limited resources in that region to address incidents of human rights violations, acknowledging that in Corriverton, we do have the FACT NGO, and in New Amsterdam, there is United Bricklayers and Comforting Hearts. However, between Corriverton and New Amsterdam, there is nothing there, and so there, as Annie would have alluded to in her presentation, there are many incidents of human rights violations, and sometimes that's an unforgotten region, and it may explain why this region had the highest number of human rights violations documented. This slide is a bit busy, and I don't want you to be overwhelmed by the data presented here. But what this slide is showing is the different categories of human rights violations that were reported and the frequency at which they were reported. And I would have highlighted here in the red circle those categories of human rights violations that were frequently reported. You can see here harassment and verbal abuse was frequently reported, not being hired, forced to leave job, forced to leave community or home, and physical violence were all forms of human rights violations that were frequently reported. So the category harassment or verbal abuse accounted for 30.8% of all reported cases. Physical violence accounted for 20% of all cases, while forced to leave job represented 16% of all reported cases. Other forms of human rights violations that were frequently reported include breach of confidentiality, discrimination by a relative, emotional abuse, forced to leave home or community, not hired, and gender-based violence, all accounting for 26% of all reported cases. The reason why I highlighted gender-based violence in blue is that earlier in the presentation when I was presenting on the limitations of the findings is that although you're seeing here physical violence accounted for 77, it was reported rather 77 times the frequency and accounted for 20% of cases. Many times that physical violence is also gender-based violence, and so in documenting in the SID, the reporting officer might just tick physical violence, and so physical violence is reported, but gender-based violence is underreported. Less frequently reported forms of human rights violations that we saw included blackmail, cyber abuse, denied access to health care, and I think someone posed a question earlier about you're seeing discrimination access in healthcare. I must say that we would have done a lot of work with healthcare providers in addressing stigma and discrimination at the institutional level and addressing attitudes of healthcare providers when dealing with LGBT persons in accessing healthcare. And I believe, if I'm correct, only 2 persons reported denied access to healthcare within the 4 years. It might mean that we are doing a good job, or it might also mean that persons, for example, who are living with HIV and is experiencing discrimination might not want to report discrimination in healthcare because their fear of repercussions. So we also need to be careful how we are interpreting the numbers here. So these were less frequently reported, and they only accounted for 3.7% of all reported cases of human rights violations over the 4-year period. We tried to find if there was an association between gender and forms of human rights violations. And what we found in the analysis using a contingency table is that there was an association between gender and forms of human rights violations. We found that trans women were more likely to experience and or report harassment or verbal abuse, physical violence, forced to leave their home or community, and forced to leave their job. These findings were consistent with global, regional, and local. Gender remains the primary marker for discrimination due to transgender visibility, gender nonconformity, and their transgressive status. Similarly, males, and this include men who are gay, bisexual, femme-presenting, queer, were more likely to report experiencing forced to leave job, harassment, or verbal abuse, and physical violence. Females, which included lesbian, bisexual, queer women, masculine presenting women, were more likely to report not being hired. Only 6 trans men reported human rights violations during the four-year period. Thus, it was difficult to deduce an association between gender and forms of human rights violations for this subgroup. There were several recommendations coming out from the analysis after looking at the data, and I just want to see this analysis. Firstly is operationalization, and there's a need to encourage operationalization of the SID by all LGBT human rights-based NGOs in Guyana, irrespective of who the donor is. And this is to support nationwide evidence or data collection. It is also imperative that the SID is being operationalized even when CBC is not funding the organization. I know it's difficult to have people to volunteer, especially in the COVID-19 time, but it's important that these mechanisms are continuous and they're not only operationalized when there is donor funding. Secondly, there's a need for more community level education and sensitization to recognize different forms of violence. For example, there was underreporting of emotional and psychological abuse, underreporting of intimate partner violence. Low numbers do not mean that these forms of violence is not happening. Perhaps it may indicate that persons do not recognize emotional and psychological abuse as violence. And so with lack of education and information, not recognizing something as violence mean that likely you're not going to report that this is happening to you. So there is a need for more education at the ground level. And finally, advocacy. Not only to document incidents of human rights violations, but as I would have highlighted earlier in the presentation, to use the data to inform advocacy work and to share the data with relevant decision-making agencies such as the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security and the Spotlight Initiative that is addressing violence against women and girls in Guyana. At this stage, I'm going to pause and hand you over back to Vidya. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alessandra, for preparing that analysis. And we know that it is very, very detailed. And so what we do this stage in wrapping up this panel is and to lead into the plenary. We like to note that there are questions. Please feel free to pose your questions in the chat and so that when we come to the plenary, we can address them. And welcome again to all of those who have just joined us. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go back and ask as we move ahead into answering the question, what next? This data was collected between 2017 and 2021, which is the period while the court case was going on. The judgment was reached in 2018. So it goes to show, I mean, and I'm quoting Candacy, who said, is that you can change laws, we also have to change hearts and minds. And so sometimes, so the question is now going to the three, to Candacy, and to Kenny and to Annie, to ask, what would you like to, what's next now after changing the cross-dressing law? The Parliament has removed the law from the law books now, which is the process after the CCJ. It's taken so many years to do it, a long time. What do you envisage next? Candacy?
Thanks, Video. As you rightly said, it has been a long haul. And one of the evidence is to continue to collect this data to show where the human rights violation is continue to happen. So even though that work to change the laws, and if we don't change heart and mind, you remember a few years when we were mourning two of our trans colleagues, and at the particular time this present government who is in, they were the particular minister who was the junior minister, the Ministry of Finance, who's also a pastor who felt itself that LGBT person is
We
abomination.
can call his name. I will call his name. The homophobic Bishop Juan Jill. Yes, he's very homophobic.
Recognize that he's back there in his ministry. So when we said going to parliament, we don't want it to be taken as a parade and a show parade. It's already litigated through the court. And we wanted to know what next, what the future holds for trans persons. Even when I remove from all this, what a young trans person envision. Would we able to access education across the board like any other person? Would we be able to access home? So when the word what next is now we just sitting here and proposing what next, but the same energy and sense that the government now throw in is to support LGBT person, bring us to the forum that we can able to recognize our human rights like any other Guyanese person and able to contribute, because right now the country is robbing itself collectively from LGBT wealth, and human resource is very important for any country. There's trans person who is equal resource and willing to contribute, but don't have the opportunity to do that freely. And what we see, even though that we see the pattern in Region 4, there's a lot of person who still face discrimination in Region 4 and throughout the region. And because you would have seen in the presentation, and you see even with our panel makeup, there's only Region 3, Region 4, and Region 6. Because as an organization, our funding has not been coming from government support. We don't receive a subvention. We had something that called social contracting, but it's so small. It hasn't begun yet for the year to do this work. So we wanted that the government actually get us informed to do the work, because the government can't do it by themselves, civil society neither can do it by themselves. We need to work collectively to achieve one common goal. And the goal is to human rights. And where human rights violation, whether it's the LGBT person, women, battered women, children, we need to put our resource that not just showing about we become an island nation, but how that we resource could actually change the life of citizens. And that is when we said, what next? And it's to bring about this holistic change around our people.
Thank you very much for that, Candacy. So human rights is a thrust of the future, not only because if anything that your case has done is shown to Ghana the importance of how human rights works and how sometimes our laws were not framed within a time of human rights. These laws were framed in a time of colonial oppression, right? So, okay, Annie, what would you like to see? What's next? I mean, Annie, you there?
I am here, and I think Miss Candace would have touched on a lot of point there, but I'll
Right.
continue from there. Yes, so what next? I think this is where we have the opportunity as a community to continue to push the government further, because now we have them, as we can recall, the minister, what he would have said then, and now it's something different. So we have the opportunity, we have the torch now, and we need to work and push them more in getting our voice heard. What next? I would like to see a higher percentage of our LGBT population, especially trans women, being employed, because as Alessandra would have presented, you can see not hiring, it's one of a major issue in Region 6, in Berbice in general. And because of you being a transgender, they don't want you to work. And with now we have system in place, I can, we can able to push the government that to make it mandatory that despite of how a person identified, despite of what they choose to be their attire, they can be employed. As Candacy rightly said, we as a human resource, we have a lot to contribute to this, to our country development, but because of how society sees us, that's how they pushed us at the corner. But now we have the opportunity to push them into the corner and to having our voices heard, having employment, having acceptance within the community. Also, we need to do some work within our community as well, because let's not sit here and paint a picture that everything is so crystal clear in our community. We need to be more empowered. We need to able to conduct ourselves when needs arise. We able to put certain mechanism in place, because there is a thin line between your personal life and your professional life. So all these things need to be put in place, because we want people to accept us. Then there are some of curving of ways that need to also be done as well. But before I close, is that we have them now, so that we can able to say, look, we can work together, both government, both LGBT community work together, and able to let the private sector know, let the general public know that these people exist. There is law to protect them. They can work in bank. They can be in the banking sector. They can be in the gold mining sector. They can be in the oil sector, because everything is oil now. And they can dress in their attire once they dress presentable, and they have a qualification to do the work, then they have the opportunity to help this country grow. So that's what I vision. That's what I hope to see in the future as we continue. As I said in the beginning, it's a great step for us. It's I know some people might consider it to be small. Some people would have hoped for more things, but I believe in that. Thank God for small mercies and pray for bigger one in store. So I know that we are heading there. At least things would have started to take shape. We're like a potter. We're being molded. So as you go on, you're going to be fashioned. And I hope that all of us can able not, as Candacy rightly said, when we are gone, I always portray myself as the mother, and Alexandra know that, Candacy know that. I'm the mother for, from Clifton Village all the way to Siparuta. My home is being used as a safe space for persons, LGBT persons who have been put out, who have been in this depression, who has been in a partner intimate violence and all these things. So I want to see empowerment. We must be empowered. So when the few mothers gone, then we know that we have the children to take responsibility of the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Annie, for visioning what the future will look like, and also making a point about how, right, as the next generation, you're making, I think, a lot of advice what happens to younger persons, and younger persons to assert and build on the work and remember the human rights.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Kenny, what would you say for what's next? What would you like to see happening, Kenny? Kenny, you there? You may have to unmute.
Have to be unmuted.
No, you are there.
Okay,
We're hearing you now, Kenny.
on. Remember, I have slides.
Oh, you have a slide? Okay, you can share back the screen then?
Yeah.
For the what's next. Go ahead, Kenny.
You have.
You got to flip to the presentation, Kenny. If you click the orange arrow, it might
Okay.
move right. Yeah,
I'm
we're seeing
on.
the screen. Yeah, you might have to view the slideshow. Right.
Okay, are you seeing what's next on your screen?
No. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're seeing what next, Kenny. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Kenny.
All right. Let me say I want to thank my colleague Annie for putting the point whereby we need employment. We need the private sector and the government, the public sector. We need the attitude to change and to start hiring trans people. That is much needed. What next? My first point is that The LGBT community, more so the trans community, need to be educated on their rights as humans. Just a minute. Yeah, let me go again. The LGBT community, more so the trans community, needs to be educated on their rights as human beings and what change in law means for them. Consultation and training needs to be done with the police, medical personnel, community groups, religious groups, and civil society on how to approach and treat LGBT people. We have to start working as Guyanese to be more tolerant towards people of different gender identity and expression. And this is not only for the general population, this is also for persons within the LGBT community, because most time you will find persons who identify as gay will frown upon persons who identify as trans, and persons who identify as trans man would frown upon persons who identify as trans women. So we need to come together as a community, and then the world, the rest of the world, and the rest of the country is going to take us seriously. The LGBT community would like to see repeal the Criminal Law Offences Act 1893, Section 352, 353, 354, and all other laws that discriminate, stigmatize, and criminalize us and rob us of equality and basic human rights. And lastly, we would like to see the amendment of Article 149 of the Guyana Constitution to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and to take legislative and policy measures to prevent the fight against violence and fight against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And thank you very much. I now hand you over back to video.
Thank you for sharing that and for naming the laws specifically, Kenny, in terms of some of the specific issues. And I think Kenny, Candacy, and Annie, you all spoke about the discrimination in employment. And one of the other laws which has to be changed is the Prevention of Discrimination Act, which needs to include sexual orientation in one of the as one of the grounds that people cannot discriminate against. Because right now, that is a law that covers discrimination in the workplace. And what you see happening, of course, nobody's ever brought any um, actions as yet, but that act is what guides that. So, so we have the Constitution, we have the individual laws, and sometimes there are policies as well that have to be changed. So now we're in the part of our discussion. Ken, you can stop sharing your screen now. Just remember, right? Okay. So we're now in this part of the discussion to deal with the Q&A, and there were some questions that had been posted. So friends, you can either raise your hands or use the Q&A. Millie, I notice your hand is still raised. If you want to type the question, if you don't get through with the um, with the muting of the mic, the unmuting of your mic.
I think I got through now.
Oh, Millie, good. Go ahead, Millie. Go ahead, Millie. Good. Go ahead.
Question was for the first panel, but I know that panel is gone, but it's still the time. Yeah. During the court case, the litigants and also other trans persons were still being harassed, arrested for loitering and cross-dressing. And this continues to happen even after the ruling. But they using it now. The police and law enforcement is using it as loitering. During that time, although we know that we are doing the case and we're expecting victory, and we know as citizens of the country, we are all people, and there was no mechanism set up to talk about the mental health of the litigants and also other persons who are harassed because of the way they present themselves. Now, I know for conversation with my trans people that there's a lot of scarring or trauma that happens when you're being incarcerated or being forced into a lockup, into a male lockup when you're dressed as a female, because there's fear of rape and other violations by inmates. That was left unaddressed. In the sense there were no mental health mechanisms set up to help to coping mechanism. Now that we have got the ruling and we're talking about the next steps, we still have trans people who do not really understand what the ruling really meant. And we have people in the general public who still wants to use the ruling so they can cause a lot of ripple of frictions. They say, okay, now that ruling is there, people want to get married, but it's nothing like the people want to get
Hi, Millie, you there?
married. I would really like for
Millie, you break up a little bit there. Millie? Millie, we lost you there. Hi, Millie.
all right.
You
You hearing
repeat
me
what you
now?
just said. Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
just repeat what you said?
The general public is also using the ruling
Mm.
to cause hate because they're saying that we want to get married. And that
Mhm.
in itself will have an effect on us because there is a lot of misconception on what the ruling states with the general public and within our own community as trans people. So there still need to be education. There need to be system and mechanisms set up for mental health support, and there need to be some mechanisms set up also so people can be aware of awareness sessions or PSAs by government and civil society. I know government will does like to jump and say, oh, they're doing this, but the only way this can happen is through civil society because many of us as LGBT person, trans person, we want to look up to our elders in our community. So when government do something, we don't believe it because we say it's a trap set for us. So I'm putting this out there so if it's been documented, it can be presented at a higher level for us to have a mental health support for the litigants and all other persons who suffer trauma during the case. And the sensitization awareness session for general public and also my trans people. Thank you, Vidya.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Millie. And we had a specific question from Robert as well, asking about mapping mental health, like reporting any sort of mental health, specific mental health issues generally. Um, does Alessandra, Gulliver, do we want to talk any more about, or can you talk about what kind of mental health support is available now, and what is needed to have good, any work that needs to be done? Are mental health professionals available? Do they understand trans and LGBT issues? I mean, what has been the experience? Alessandra, Gulliver?
If hi Vidya, if Gulliver agrees, our social worker is also on with us, and she works directly with the community, providing psychosocial support, mental health counseling, and so. And I would like to give her the opportunity if she can speak on that specific topic.
Sure.
So McEwan, over to
Megnauth, you can, okay, we can hand you, Megnauth, you there? You can hear, can you talk? You're available to talk, unmute the mic and so. Megnauth, the mic is still muted.
She just needs to unmute the mic video.
Right. I wonder if, do you press the orange icon? Oh. You got through, Megnauth? Oh no, she's out. Hi.
Video, I moved
Okay,
her
sure.
over as a panelist, so she should be able to speak now.
Maybe you want to try speaking? You're still muted. The session is muted. Hi, Megan can speak
Megnauth,
now.
you just need to click the orange icon with the microphone, and you'll be able to speak. It's at the top of your control panel, an orange icon with a microphone. You just need to click that. I think she's having some issues video. I think you
Right.
can go on to the next slide.
Okay. Candacy, Candacy, you hear me? Did you want to give like a general overview of what is available with the mental health support at GTU and what the experience has been like? Of course, you are doing this in the time of a pandemic too, right? So, right.
Yeah, as Ali highlighted some of the service we would have been given through our social worker, but we think there is more need to be done in terms of mental health indirectly to have directly a mental health specialist in terms of dealing with the community. So our social work is just a social worker, but she's not a mental health specialist. And some of the challenge we were able to refer, and we had session outside from where we would have Carlet who would come and facilitate some session on mental health, and we would have work. But our limited resource and able to write out to the community is very still in terms of finance, in terms of doing these sessions, because you know this session come with a cost in terms of moving transperson from one particular area to the other area. Even if we go to region 6 to do it, then we have to have traveling to accommodate the person to be a part of those sessions. Even if we're going to do it Zoom, then we need to put credit in people's phone. And because of our resource in terms of
We lost you, Gulliver, we lost you for a minute there.
yes, so we recognize that there's a gap within our mental health services, but we do what we do in terms with this worker. But it's really and truly that we need to have a mental health specialist to deal with it. Because myself actually litigating this case is actually a decade. And I didn't have a chance at no time to able to brief with a mental health specialist. And many transfers going about from siloed with trauma.
Right. So I think so that's a very important point Millie raised, and one that you have to advocate for that even going forward, that support must include mental health support, and that we recognize that there's a cost and that is special training. And I think, and Megnauth is honest that a social worker, not all social workers necessarily have mental health training. So they're very different fields, and even at UG they make it very clear that the degree in social work is not always a degree in counseling. So thanks for raising that, and praises to GTU for sustaining, providing those, and to Megnauth for doing that work, and that has to be available throughout the country. So on that, okay. So in the questions, Ali, Mrs. Granger asked a question. I think you had hinted at it, but specifically about why only those reports and what's happening in the hinterland areas. And does anyone know
Right.
what's going on? Yeah, go ahead, Ali.
Right. So I responded, but briefly, what happens is that the SID is only implemented by Guyana Trans United and SASOD. But what GTO would have done is they went a step further and they employed SID reporting officers in the outer regions, so region 6 and region 3. And that is why we were able to present data coming from region 6 and region 3. However, because of limited funding and the unavailability of people in those regions to work with, the SID is not being implemented in non-coastal regions. Hence, that is one of the recommendations that we are making, to have the SID implemented across the country, and even organizations that are allied to the LGBT community, such as HIAS and UNHCR, that works in Region 1 and Region 7, they can have access to the SID database, and they can input at an organizational level. And all of this data coming from Guyana is feed back to CBC based in Jamaica, so they'll have a holistic country data for Guyana.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Ali. Mrs. Granger, does that answer the question? And I think it's important because you said we have new, like in Region 1 and so there's these intersections, like with the NGOs working on migration and with the immigrant population, with indigenous populations and so some more work has to be done. Jasmine and Alicia kind of asked similar questions, and there's a specific, Kenny hinted at it. Does GTU plan to go to court to challenge the buggery laws? Or what? Gulliver? Candacy?
As I rightly said, sorry, I wanted to say that laws are good, as I said before, but whether go before the court and spend another 10-year litigation, I would like the government, just like this law, to have a sit down with the LGBT first, ask what is some of the things that they need to move forward, because I don't know if we might have another year of another 10-year litigation because court is very expensive. And there's no person to take on to bring in this case to court. I can tell you, trade. The government went now after it was done, went through all the court, and then went to read the law to the parliament. If those same decisions then consent, okay, these are some of the things, and like how we went with the progressive laws and the non-discrimination laws, and then repeal them in the parliament.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. And Candacy, while you're on the Marlon from CBC has applauded GTU for hosting the activity. And Marlon asked, what intervention is being done? Is there any intervention to deal with the negative and positive consequences of the actual change in the law since last week? Are there any planned interventions or so to be anything going on?
One of the things is that GTU as a non-governmental organization, these are some of the forums that we will embark in the next months to come. And as my colleagues in Region 3, Melton said, the sensitization needs to happen both sides. And outside of the and one of the things is, always said, is how do we change target mind? One of the things is that you have to like me as a religious person, but how do we coexist as human beings in a society that multi-race, culture, and all this? And how do we create that is one.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And I just want to share Antonio Paul, Sir Paul's comments. Good work, Kenny. I'm proud of you. To everyone, continue to do your activism. And just to invoke, Antonio Paul, Sir Paul, we called your name last week at West Demerara Regional Hospital, just in case you want to know if you felt a little breeze. We talked your name last week. We were doing this training, and your work there in the hospital was commended. So we must invoke you here, and we're glad that you're here in the session. And thank you for being here, because this is all part of the work that goes on. So Sir Paul is one of the persons is from Region 3, and if I'm not mistaken, is a local government councillor still in that best NDC. So we're very glad, Antonio, Sir Paul, for your leadership. Right. So I think we've got all the questions answered. Robert made a note about IT. Yes, always these new platforms, sometimes, things take a while to learn. Right. Are there any more thoughts or so? I just want to make sure there was no, are there any more? Right. So I don't see any more questions or thoughts. I just wondered then, so maybe we could have some closing thoughts from everyone. So I'll probably come down the start by Region 6, coming down. Annie, what closing thoughts you would have after the discussion and questions now, based on what you heard?
So my closing thoughts is that we have come a far way as a community, and that there is strength in togetherness. So let's continue to come together. Let's continue to use our energy. We all are unique in our own way, and so let's build on that. Let's build on our uniqueness and use that to more empower our community, because as we heard from Millie, and it's right. We need to be empowered. We need to continue being educated. Continue to do research. Continue to zooming on what is happening around us. So for me, empowerment is the key in moving on as a community. And once we are empowered, then we can do wonders. We can do wonders. If we go back to all the great events that happened around us, is that the groups that would have fought before us for different reasons, they all come together and they were all empowered to move things and have things done. So just like us, we don't have to use violence. We have never been using violence in the past. We have used our own selves, our own experiences, our own things that would have happened to us. So yes, empowerment. Let's continue to be empowered, and let's continue to work together, bringing all our efforts, all our energy, all our zeal as a community, and move negative things out of our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Just before Candacy, sorry, Millie, did you have your hand up again, Millie?
Yes, Vidya, I have my hands up.
Sure.
Basically, I know during the time, and it took a lot of years before the verdict or the ruling. And during that time, I would really want to recommend, don't know to whom, I want my sisters who were affected during that time, the litigants, to be compensated financially. They went through a lot. They bear the bruntness. They were undressed in public. And there need to be some compensation. Some people might feel it's okay, money is not everything, but sometimes money can be a console to us. And I would really like to recommend that for my sisters to get some financial compensation from the government. I don't know what channel we can take it through, but I really want to see something happen so they can have something tangible to say, yes, we have won. This is what I have gained. Thank you.
Right. And okay, Candacy, perhaps in your closing, you can address the issue of the compensation, as you were one of the litigants, and how people feel. How are people now, the litigants, right?
I think with anybody in the note of money, you would want it to feel good. But first, when the ruling came, I said at the time, if we can literally in our compensation would have been the gateway in terms of government providing us with spaces to do education work with our community and the wider community in terms of going to healthcare and to speak what the ruling meant, what the cases was about, and to accommodate us to go in and to have this training, because to me it was big and change it and to continue to change hearts and mind. And we know these things come with a price, and if the government was willing at a particular time to pay for this session, I would have gone that way for myself. But that does not speak to the rest of the litigant, because it wasn't just me. It was 4 other litigants who actually take this right away through the court. It was 7 of us picked up, but 4 who has the courage. And compensation might be various and different for other person. Even though that now I'm speaking here, there's actually only 2 of us remained in Guyana who actually take the case, because going through the court system, pressure was being to bear on person, because all of us at a particular time was engaged in sex work, and every time the case showed up or something about the case or a picture was shown and person was losing income, people led to frustration, person went away to seek a better life, and compensation might need to hear from them what they would want it as a compensation. As Milton rightly said, there were a lot of trauma. There were persons who felt victimized even by the system and re-victimized by family setting, because you were presented with your family name, and some person would have felt the brunt of some of the family and religious and community member. So compensation might be various to different person. But for me at a particular time, I were looking to able to go into these places that the government would have provided us to able to go in and to do this. I am grateful today that the little step that we has gone, but there's a lot need to do, because what we seen is empowerment for younger trans person, that they were able to carry on this vision. We don't want this vision to last with a few of us that we were old, but the training need to continue, that we able to move another generation into success. And it's not only what able to do by LGBT organization and human rights activists, but the government playing a meaningful role in all its citizens' life.
Candace, you're right. Is that everyone? I mean, compensation might not only, as Millie, compensation can happen in so many different ways. It might not just be a matter of money, and it's how the courts award judgment. And the fact is that it took years, and it's stressful, and all the harassment and everything that is going on. But it is part is that that the work has to continue, and that there's a burden of trauma on people when you have to keep doing the work. Ali, any closing thoughts or so to share? Alessandra?
Yes, just reflecting on everything my trans siblings would have shared. I believe moving forward, community will be very important for us in Guyana. I'm not very old. I'm still a relatively young trans activist, but over the past 12 years, I have seen the division becoming more pronounced within our community. Trans people dividing along racial lines, ethnic line, political lines, regional lines, right? And so community would be very critical for us if we are to move forward as a community. And if we want to address all these social issues, mental health issues, if we want to challenge the laws, I believe our actions would be more powerful if we come together as a community to address it. So that's the first point. The other point I want to make is the importance of mental health, because we are involved in all this activism and laboring, and we provide some amount of mental health services to LGBT persons who need it. And oftentimes we forget about ourselves. And I just want LGBT persons, especially my trans siblings on the panel this morning, to reflect on how do we take care of ourselves and how do we take care of each other when we are taking care of the larger LGBT community. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Alessandra. So the whole issue of self-care and community care, the connection between self-care and community care, and that yes, I mean there's some people who do not want to see any community united because it suits them to divide and rule, and there's sometimes external forces who drive these divisions. It's not only internal. And yes, we have multiple identities. Guyana is a nasty political place. And so we have all these multiple experiences, and we need to find the opportunities to come together, because healing happens in community too, right? Mental health support, it doesn't only happen one-on-one, it has to happen in community too. Kenny, any closing? Kenny, you're on. Kenny, you're there?
Yes,
You can just share any closing thoughts. Yeah.
yes. Are you hearing me?
Yep, hearing you loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay, once again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I like to say that given 10 years back to present day now, we are in a better place. And I'm very confident that in the next 10 years to come, life for LGBT persons in Guyana would be much, much better. I'm very optimistic and very hopeful that we will be given our rights to live free and to live as every other Guyanese citizen here. Also, in 2012, a national conversation was started by the PSSC. We like to see that continue because that's the way forward for our people. We
Wait,
like
which
to
one is that?
see
Sorry, Kenny, could you repeat that?
in, yeah, in 2012, a national conversation was started by the PSSC, that's the
B,
parliament body, right?
okay, the
It was
Parliament.
to discuss the attitude of Guyanese on the changing of legislation and so on. And they had a pause during the prorogation period and then the change of government and so
All
on. They
right.
had a pause. So I'm hoping that they get back to that national conversation. And I think that's one of the other things that we as organization and NGO needs to push for. And overall, I see a bright future for LGBT persons right here in Guyana. I know a lot of us has died and we're not here anymore. A lot of us has migrated, looking for a better life. But I'm one of those persons who are dedicated to staying right here, and I know a better day is coming for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kenny, for that, hopeful optimism and, something that that's a spirit that always must be shared. And Timothy, by the way, just friends, as we move into the vote of thanks, for Omatola to get ready, Timothy has shared in the chat another PANCAP event, a very important PANCAP event about the COVID vaccines in children. It's a town hall interactive event. So if you want to sign up, you have to register for it. So please take the opportunity, because for people who have children and they want to ask questions about the vaccination for children, it's a good opportunity to do so. So I'm just mentioning that. So our final item on the agenda for this call is a vote of thanks, and we ask Omatola to please come forward and give the vote of thanks. Omatola
Hello, good
Edwards.
afternoon.
Hi, Omatola. We can hear you. Yep.
Hi, good
Click on it.
afternoon, Pedro.
Yeah.
First of all, I would just like to reiterate what I've been hearing a lot during the session today, is that Miss Candacy McEwan would have mentioned that she believed in changing hearts and minds. And if we want to move forward as a community, we have to change hearts and minds, because a lot of times in our community, why we would face stigma and discrimination is because of lack of knowledge from the wider population. So I believe that in changing hearts and minds, we were able to get the knowledge out there in order to move forward as a country and as a community. However, this journey has not been easy, and I would just like to acknowledge some of the persons who have made this entire process a success. We would like to thank the Europe team who were deeply involved in the litigation throughout this entire case concerning the cross-dressing issue that has been long overdue. Miss Tracy Robinson, Arif Bulkan, just Judge Gino Persaud, Mr. Nigel Hughes, Misha Kapuran, Sean Mendez, SASOD Guyana. We'd also like to thank the litigants who were involved in this case, because without them, we wouldn't have a case. And I don't think that this law would have been struck out of our constitution without the effort that our litigants put in and the persons who were involved. We'll also like to thank the board of directors from Guyana Trans United, our community members, our allies who have been supporting us over the years. We'd also like to thank the PANCAP organization because they were involved in like when our litigants and some of our community members had to go to Trinidad for the hearing, they would have funded some of the person's airfare and accommodation. So we would like to thank them for that. We also like to thank the Guyana Rainbow Foundation, who also supported one of their community members in going to Trinidad to sit in the hearing of the case. And today, we like to thank you, Vidya, for a very interactive and informative session. You did a very great job moderating this session. And we would also like to thank PANCAP, especially Mr. Timothy Austin, for all the technical support today. So thank you, everyone. And we'd also like to thank all the persons who were logged in. And we hope that moving forward, we move forward in togetherness and we can become one.
Thank you so much. And it was my pleasure to moderate. It was my privilege to be here and to share space. And I just, I'm glad because I think since the law was dismissed in the parliament, trans persons were not represented in the media. So I hope that this opportunity is used for the media in Guyana and elsewhere to reflect how trans persons feel about this particular, especially the litigants, how they feel about the change in the law. I appreciate in summary, I think there's some important questions as we move forward in Guyana and elsewhere as we're recovering from disasters, we're dealing with the pandemic. Annie and Gulliver, Kenny, this important thing about community, it extends that not only trans community, but trans persons are part of community too. And therefore it's up to the wider community not to seek that we all have to take care of each other regardless of our difference. And therefore accepting trans and other LGBTIQ plus persons. I'm very grateful to Timothy, Austin, and PANCAP team, and to Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, who were hosting and managing the SID database with the scarce resources. And as you've learned, you certainly joined the call that it's a wonderful and important project which could be taken up by other organizations so we continue to have the kind of data that is needed to show evidence of how things are going so we can ask those questions and we can see where changes are needed specifically. So I wish you all safety and wellness. Please remember to register for the town hall. And I think, we're on time, 12 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any last minute questions or anything. But of course, people can reach out to Guyana Trans United or so if they have any follow-up. So thank you all, and thank you very much, Timothy. And I think we can end. Do stay safe, everyone, and best wishes for wellness. All right. I think, Timothy, we can end the call now. Can you end it?
Yes, you can go ahead, Vidya. You can disconnect your webcam.
Okay.
Okay.